I still remember the moment that email landed in my inbox. No warning. No message before it. Just a cold subject line staring back at me. HR needs to discuss your recent conduct. And right then, something in my chest sank. I didn't know it yet. But my silence was the only thing keeping their story alive. I opened the email slowly, almost afraid of what I'd find. It was short, way too short. Just a few dry lines telling me to make myself available for a meeting the next morning. No details. No explanation. Nothing human about it at all. It felt like a door closing behind me. My first thought was confusion. My second, disbelief. Because up until that moment, everything at work seemed steady. I'd been meeting deadlines, supporting my team, even picking up extra tasks when things got messy. There was no reason, absolutely no reason for HR to call me in like this, unless someone wanted them to. As I sat there reading that email again and again, my mind kept going back to one person, Mark. He'd been acting strange around me all week, avoiding eye contact, changing the tone in meetings, dropping little comments about things I supposedly forgot. At the time, I brushed it off. I thought maybe he was stressed. But that email made everything feel different. It made his behavior feel intentional. It made it feel planned. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my screen. And for the first time in weeks, I felt angry. Not loud anger. Quiet anger. The kind that sits behind your ribs and tightens slowly. Because if R was coming after me, someone had given them a story. And that story didn't come from me. But here's the part they didn't know. The part that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. I keep everything. Every message. Every file. Every timeline. Every detail. Not because I expect trouble, but because I've learned that people change when they think no one's paying attention. So as I stared at that cold email, something inside me shifted. I could feel it. A calmness. A focus. Almost like a quiet promise forming in my mind. If they were coming after me, if they thought I'd walk into that meeting unprepared, if they believed I'd stay silent and let their story win, they were about to learn the truth. My documentation had a voice of its own, and by the time this was over, it would speak louder than any lie ever told about me. I walked into that building on my first day feeling lighter than I had in years. New job, new city, new start. You know that feeling when life finally seems to open a door instead of shutting one. That was me. I was hopeful, excited, ready to prove myself. I told myself this would be the place where things finally worked out. And for a moment, it truly felt that way. The team welcomed me with warm smiles, and the office buzzed with energy. I remember thinking, yeah, this is where I belong. I didn't know then how quickly that feeling would change. The first person to introduce himself was Mark, tall, confident, easy grin, the kind of guy who seems like everyone's best friend. He shook my hand hard and said, "Man, we've needed someone like you. You're gonna fit right in." I believed him. I trusted that friendly tone, that relaxed laughter. Looking back now, it's almost unreal how convincing he was. Then there was Emily. Quiet, but sharp. The kind of coworker who sees everything without saying much. She helped me settle in, showed me where the files were kept, gave me tips about the company culture. Her kindness felt genuine. And even on that first day, I caught her giving me these small, almost worried glances, like she saw a storm coming long before I did. And of course, Dana, the HR manager. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect tone. She talked like every sentence had been rehearsed. On the surface, she was polite, almost overly polite. But the moment her eyes drifted away, something in her expression changed, calm but distant. Like she had already seen 1,000 problems walk in before me, and she didn't plan on solving any of them. At first, though, I brushed all of that off. I was too focused on doing well, on putting my best foot forward. My excitement drowned out every small warning sign. But signs were there. Little things. Mark always seemed to get extra attention in meetings. His ideas were praised, even when they were half-formed. Meanwhile, people like Emily, smart, thoughtful, seemed to disappear into the background. And when I shared my thoughts, Donna would smile politely. But her eyes would slide toward Mark, as if waiting for him to approve. It wasn't loud favoritism. It was quiet, soft, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. On my first week, Emily pulled me aside. Her voice low, almost hesitant. "Just be careful," she said. "Some people here aren't what they seem." I laughed it off at the time. I told her I'd be fine. But her eyes told a different story, one filled with things she wasn't ready to say. Back then, I didn't understand. Back then, I still believed the job was a fresh start. I had no idea this place would test me more than any job ever had, and I had no clue that the people I'd just met were already shaping a story I didn't know I was in. I didn't notice it right away. The changes were small at first, so small they almost slipped past me. But looking back, the first sign came during a Monday morning meeting. I had stayed late the entire week before, polishing a project update the team desperately needed. I walked in that morning feeling proud, ready to share it. But before I could even open my laptop, Mark jumped in. "I've already reviewed the new update," he said confidently. "Here's what I put together." I froze for a moment. My update, my work, my late nights, and he presented it like it was his idea from the start. At first, I thought it was an honest mistake. Maybe he didn't realize it looked that way. But as the meeting went on, he kept talking like I wasn't even in the room. Every slide I created, he narrated. Every improvement I made, he took credit for. And what hurt most was that everyone in the room nodded along. Like this was normal. I waited for a pause to speak, but by the time one came, the moment had already passed. That was the day I noticed something shift in the way people looked at me. Not hostile, just unsure. Like they were trying to figure out whether I was pulling my weight, or if Mark was carrying me. The next meeting was worse. Suddenly, I was the one being questioned. Little things at first. "Did you confirm this? Are you sure this number is right? Did you run this by Mark?" Questions that never came my way before. And then there was HR, or more specifically, Dana. One afternoon, I stopped by her office to ask about a project expectation that Mark had changed without telling me. She looked up at me with that same polished smile, but there was something empty behind it. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding," she said. "Maybe try communicating more clearly." I stood there confused. I needed to communicate more? I had emailed Mark twice. I had followed the timeline exactly. But Dana didn't ask a single follow-up question. She didn't even invite me to sit down. It felt less like support and more like dismissal. As the days passed, the pattern continued. Mark interrupting me. People glancing at him for approval instead of listening to me. HR growing colder every time I reached out. It wasn't open hostility. It wasn't loud. It was quiet and heavy. A slow pressure building under the surface. And that's when the discomfort started, turning into suspicion. Why was Mark suddenly standing in my shadow, collecting credit that wasn't his? Why were my ideas questioned only after he stepped into the spotlight? And why did HR act like every concern I raised was nothing more than noise? I didn't have answers then, but the feeling in my stomach told me one thing clearly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And soon, I would see just how deep this went. I wish I could say things got better after that. But they didn't. They got quieter, stranger, more controlled, like someone was moving pieces around a board. And I was the only one who didn't know the rules. The first real warning came from a teammate who stopped me in the hallway. She lowered her voice and said, "Hey, Mark mentioned you've been struggling to keep up. Everything okay?" My stomach dropped. Struggling? I hadn't missed a single deadline. I'd been staying late, double-checking every detail, but Mark had been talking. Not loudly. Not in front of me. Just quiet enough to shape a story behind my back. And once a story starts spreading, it becomes harder to pull it back. Over the next week, deadlines began to shift, but no one told me. A project due Friday was suddenly late by Wednesday. A meeting I never heard about was suddenly used as proof that I didn't communicate. Every time I checked my inbox, I felt like I was missing pieces of a conversation. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I overlooked something. Maybe I misread an email, but then it happened again and again and again. That's when I noticed something strange. Some emails had been forwarded to everyone except me. Not once, not twice, but several times. And you know what HR said when I asked about it? Oh, must have been an oversight. Every time I brought it up, I got the same polished smile, the same dismissive tone. No concern. No follow-up. No accountability. Just that calm, empty expression. It was like they wanted me out of the loop without saying it out loud. Meanwhile, Mark kept tightening his grip on the story he wanted people to believe. He'd walk by my desk, glance at my screen, and say, "You're still on that? I thought you'd be done by now." Loud enough for others to hear. Soft enough to make it sound like a joke, but I knew it wasn't a joke. Not anymore. The tension around me felt like a fog, slow creeping, impossible to ignore. People started treating me differently. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched me with this strange hesitation, like they weren't sure which version of me to believe. That's when the truth hit me. I knew something was happening. But the real twist was still coming. And even though frustration burned inside me quiet, heavy, painful, I forced myself to stay calm. Because reacting too fast, too loudly, would only feed the story Mark was building. So I nodded. I smiled. I kept working, but inside a voice whispered, "Watch closely. They're setting something up." And I had no idea how far they were willing to go, or how ready I needed to be when their plan finally showed itself. The moment it happened, I felt my stomach twist. A project issue 1 small glitch spread through the office like wildfire. I didn't even know anything was wrong until my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker. "HR is looking for you." Something about the client file. The client file. The one I triple-checked. The one Mark had reviewed after asking me to leave it with him. I walked toward the conference room, heart pounding, trying to stay calm. But the second I stepped inside, I knew something was off. Mark was already there, sitting next to HR like he belonged on that side of the table. And in front of him were printed screenshots. Selective screenshots. He didn't bring the full email chain. He didn't bring the updated version of the file. He didn't bring the notes we exchanged. Just the pieces that made me look careless. Dana from HR folded her hands, her expression serious yet strangely cold. "We received concerns about your handling of the project," she said, as if reading from a script. "We need to understand how this mistake happened." Mistake. Her voice echoed in my head. I opened my mouth to speak, but Mark beat me to it. "Look, I didn't want to bring this up," he said, pretending to sound uncomfortable, "but I've noticed he's been overwhelmed." I tried to help, but I guess things slipped through. The betrayal hit me so hard it felt physical. Overwhelmed? Slipped through? I remembered the night I stayed late while he left early. I remembered sending him the updated file. I remembered his exact words. "Don't worry, man. I'll handle it." And now he was using that moment to shut me down. Dana slid the screenshots toward me. "This doesn't align with our expectations," she said. "We need you to explain." Explain? How could I explain something that wasn't true? How could I defend myself when the evidence they chose was only the half that suited their story? As I looked at the table, at Mark's fake concerned expression and Dana's unreadable stare, A realization washed over me, slow and cold. They were building a case. Not a conversation. Not a misunderstanding. A case. Piece by piece, quietly, carefully. They were setting me up to take the fall. Anger rose in my chest, tight and painful. Not loud anger, quieter. The kind that settles deep inside you when someone you trusted twists your truth. But even in that moment of disbelief and betrayal, I stayed calm. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give them anything they could twist later. Instead, I looked at the screenshots and said, I'll need some time to review this. Because while they thought they had every angle covered, they had no idea I kept records of everything. No idea that their story had cracks. No idea that this setup would be the start of something they never saw coming. My silence didn't mean defeat. It meant preparation. I walked into the follow-up meeting knowing exactly what was waiting for me. Still, nothing could prepare me for how quickly they tried to corner me. The moment I sat down, Dana folded her hands and sighed, one of those long, heavy sighs meant to make you feel smaller before the conversation even starts. We just want to help you, she said gently. Too gently. But we need you to acknowledge your part in this issue so we can move forward. Acknowledge my part. Those words sat in the air like a trap. Mark leaned forward, nodding like he genuinely cared. Honestly, man, if you just admit the mistake, this won't go any further. We can smooth it out. HR just needs assurance you're willing to improve. The room felt smaller, tighter, like they were trying to squeeze me into a confession that didn't belong to me. I took a breath. I didn't cause the issue, I said calmly. And I need time to look through everything before I say anything. Dana exchanged a quick glance with Mark, a glance that said more than words ever could. That's unfortunate, she replied, her voice still smooth but colder now. When employees can't take responsibility, it limits how far they can grow here. There it was, the soft threat. Not loud, not direct, just sharp enough to hurt. Mark added, and honestly, leadership is losing confidence. If we keep having problems, I don't know how stable your position will be. Stable. The way he said it made my pulse spike. My future at that job, my livelihood, was being dangled like a string. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and steady. Not because they doubted me, but because they knew the truth and still twisted it. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to call out every lie. I wanted to tell them exactly how wrong they were. But then a strange calm washed over me. A quiet realization, arguing wouldn't save me. Raising my voice would only feed their story. They were building a narrative. And I needed to build something stronger. So I leaned back, kept my voice steady, and simply said, I understand. Their shoulders relaxed. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd accepted defeat, but I wasn't defeated. Not even close, because the moment I walked out of that room, I opened my laptop and began pulling every email, every timestamp, every file version I had ever touched. I dug through logs, chat messages, update histories, anything that revealed the full picture. A picture they never thought I could paint. Each document I saved was like a piece of armor. Each screenshot was another crack in their story. And as the folder grew, so did my resolve. They thought they'd won. They had no idea. I'd been tracking everything. I remember sitting at my desk that night long after everyone else had gone home. The office was dark, silent, and for the first time in weeks, I felt in control. Because in front of me was something they never expected. Something they didn't even know existed. My documentation. Not just a few emails. Not a couple of screenshots. But an entire system I'd built without even realizing how valuable it would become. Opened a folder on my desktop labeled Work Backup. Inside it were subfolders organized by month, by project, by team. Every message I had ever exchanged with Mark. Every request he made. Every update I sent. Timestamps, version history. Meeting recaps I wrote for myself after every call. As I clicked through each file, patterns started to form. Every time Mark claimed I'd missed a deadline, I had proof he changed the deadline without telling me. Every time he said he never saw an update, there was an email showing he replied to it. Every time he told HR I didn't communicate, I found messages where he acknowledged my notes, then conveniently ignored them. And that wasn't all. I discovered, accidentally, missing emails, ones the team received, but HR somehow left me out of. But thanks to Emily and a few others copying me on earlier threads, I had the original timelines. The omissions weren't mistakes, they were choices. The deeper I went, the clearer the truth became. Every lie Mark told, every subtle shift HR made, every detail they tried to twist. I had a written contradiction for it. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself piece by piece, revealing the picture they tried so hard to hide. For the first time in weeks, the anger inside me softened into something else. Power. Not loud power. Not aggressive. A quiet, steady confidence. I opened a new notebook and began outlining each point. The date Mark changed deadlines. The messages he ignored. The statements HR contradicted. The moments they tried to corner me. I numbered everything. Linked every note to a file. Built a timeline so clear a stranger could understand it. But I didn't stop there. Spent the next hour researching workplace rights calmly, strategically. I read about employee documentation, rights during investigations, the importance of evidence. The more I learned, the stronger I felt. They expected me to panic. They expected me to break. But instead, I was building something they couldn't control. By the time I closed my laptop, my fear had shifted into focus. My doubt into preparation. My silence into a plan. Because now, I wasn't just defending myself. I was getting ready to reveal a truth so clear, so organized, so undeniable, that even HR would be left speechless. And this was only the beginning, the final review meeting. That's what the subject line said. Not a discussion, not a follow-up, a final review. Anyone else might have walked into that room shaking. But not me, not anymore. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I showed up holding nothing but a small notebook. No laptop, no stack of papers. Just a simple, quiet confidence. Mark and Dana were already inside. Mark looked relaxed, leaning back in his chair like the ending was already written. Dana had that same polished look, but this time, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let's make this quick," she said. "We just need your acknowledgement so we can close out the report." Close out the report. They were ready to shut me down. I sat, opened my notebook gently, and looked up at them. "Before I acknowledge anything," I said, "I want to go over a few details." Mark's grin tightened. Dana's eyebrows lifted, surprised, maybe even annoyed. But I stayed calm. I flipped to the first page. "On March 2nd, I began. You said I missed a deadline." I slid a printed email from my notebook, just one page. "Here's the message where you move the deadline to the 4th. Time-stamped, confirmed by you." Dana shifted in her seat. I turned another page. "On March 10th. You told HR I didn't send the update." I placed another email in front of them. "This is your reply to that exact update." Mark stopped smiling. Then I went to the third page. "And here's the project issue you blamed on me." I showed them the file history, the version Mark edited. The mistake was made after I handed the file over. The timestamps show that clearly. Silence. Heavy silence. Dana's posture stiffened. She looked at the papers, then at Mark, then back at the papers, as if trying to understand how their story unraveled so fast. Mark's face turned pale. He didn't say a word. I kept going, calmly, steadily, each page revealing another truth they had tried to twist. Every document was simple, clear, impossible to deny. No anger in my voice. No frustration. Just facts. With each piece I laid down, the power in the room shifted. It moved from their side of the table to mine. Dana finally cleared her throat. I wasn't aware of all these details. I nodded. I know. That's why I brought them. Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His confidence had cracked entirely, for the first time since I started at that company. They were the ones without answers. When I closed my notebook, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control, calm, truth on my side. I stood slowly and said, "Let me know when you're ready to review this properly." Then I walked out, leaving them staring at the documents that destroyed their story. And just like that, the meeting they thought would end me became the meeting that exposed them. The day after that meeting, I walked into the office expecting tension, maybe even confrontation. But what I got instead was silence, not peaceful silence. A careful silence. People avoided making eye contact. Conversations stopped when I passed, and even the air felt different. It was like everyone sensed something had shifted, like the ground beneath. Their story was finally giving way. A few hours into the morning, I received an email from HR. "We'd like to revisit the situation." Revisit. A word they never used before. A word that meant one thing. Their confidence had collapsed. When I stepped into the conference room, Dana was already seated. But this time, her demeanor was completely different. Her shoulders weren't as straight. Her voice didn't have that practiced certainty. "Thank you for meeting with us again," she said softly. "I think there may have been some miscommunication." Miscommunication. The same people who cornered me, pressured me, and painted me as unreliable were now trying to rewrite the tone of the entire investigation. Mark sat beside her, but he wasn't leaning back this time. He was hunched forward, staring at the table, avoiding my eyes completely. I took my seat and nodded. "I'm here to listen." Dana cleared her throat and continued. "After reviewing the materials you shared, we realized there are some inconsistencies in the earlier reports. We'd like to reassess everything before moving forward." Inconsistencies. That was their new word for lies. I didn't react. I didn't smile or push back or remind them of the way they spoke to me earlier. I just opened my notebook again, not to show anything, just to let the gesture remind them that I had everything documented. The truth was no longer something they could argue with. It was written. Dated, timestamped. Dana glanced at Mark, clearly waiting for him to speak. He finally managed a quiet, "Yeah. I think things got mixed up. I didn't mean for it to look the way it did." Look the way it did. Another soft attempt to smooth over the damage, but I didn't need to correct him. I didn't need to raise my voice, because the evidence had already done the talking. I leaned back slightly and said, "I appreciate you both taking the time to review everything. Let me know what you decide moving forward." Just like that. Calm, controlled. They expected anger. They expected me to fight or crumble or beg, but instead, I let the truth carry the weight. Dana nodded quickly, almost too eagerly. "Of course. We'll be in touch. And thank you for your patience." Her tone wasn't polished anymore. It was cautious, almost respectful. When I stood to leave, Mark still hadn't looked up. His plan had backfired, and he knew it. HR knew it. Everyone who heard whispers of the investigation would soon know it too. And all it took was the truth organized. Undeniable, steady. As I walked out of that room, one thought echoed in my mind. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't need to raise itself at all. I always imagined the aftermath would be loud arguments, meetings, whispers in the hallways. But the real shift came quietly. The following week, HR didn't call me in again. They didn't question me, didn't push, didn't hint at the instability they once waved over my head. Instead, I noticed something else happening. My employee file was updated. Not with warnings or negative notes, but with corrected timelines, revised summaries, and adjustments to the investigation report. HR didn't announce the changes. They didn't apologize. They simply rewrote the truth in the places they had once twisted it. It was the silence that confirmed it. They knew they were wrong. And Mark? His fall didn't come with a crash. It came slowly, almost invisibly. Like a tower quietly losing its foundation. Assignments he used to control were moved to other team members. People stopped asking for his input during meetings. His name wasn't mentioned in project updates. And every time he spoke, the room felt unsure. Like they were finally seeing the cracks. The confidence he once wore so proudly had faded. Not because of anything I said, but because the truth had already exposed him. And my coworkers? Their shift was the most unexpected part. People who once looked past me suddenly nodded when I walked by. They asked for my thoughts in meetings, listened closely, trusted my judgment. It wasn't dramatic, no applause or big speeches, just a steady change in the way they treated me. Respect. Real. Earned respect. One afternoon, Emily stopped by my desk. She glanced around, making sure no one else was listening, then gave me a small, proud smile. "I heard what happened," she whispered. "Good for you. They didn't expect you to stand your ground." I smiled back. "I didn't have to stand my ground," I said quietly. "I just had to show the truth." She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. And knowing she had seen everything from the beginning. Her words meant more than she probably realized. But even with all these changes are correcting themselves, Mark losing control, my coworkers treating me differently, I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw anything in anyone's face. I didn't brag about what I uncovered. Because the victory wasn't in proving them wrong, that it was in staying calm when they tried to break me. It was in trusting myself when they twisted the story. It was in letting the documentation speak for me louder than anger, louder than fear, louder than any lie they told. And as the office returned to normal, I walked through those halls with a quiet sense of relief. Not triumph. Just peace. The kind of peace that comes when the truth finally catches up to the people who tried to hide it. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And if you're patient enough, that whisper becomes the only sound anyone can hear. I didn't understand that at the beginning of all this. Back then, I thought the only way to defend myself was to speak louder, push harder, prove my worth with force. But standing there, weeks after everything unfolded, I realized something different, something I wish I had known sooner. Staying calm isn't weakness. It's strategy. The day HR finally closed the investigation, I walked out of the building feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because I won, not because anyone apologized or tried to make up for what happened, but because I knew the truth held its ground. And I held mine. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. I didn't let anger decide my next move. I let evidence speak for itself. I let the facts rise to the surface. I let time reveal who was honest and who was in single quotes. And in the end, that quiet approach exposed more than any confrontation ever could. Looking back now, the part that stays with me isn't the betrayal or the pressure or the fear of losing everything. It's the moment I decided to trust myself, the moment I chose to gather every document, every email, every timestamp. Instead of letting their story define me. Because the truth wasn't just in what happened. It was in what I kept. My records, my notes, my proof. Every piece became a shield against their lies. Every detail became a step forward. Every organized folder became a reminder that I wasn't powerless, not even when they tried to make me feel that way. And the deeper lesson? The one I'll carry with me forever. People may try to rewrite your story when they think you won't fight back. But you don't need to yell to protect your name. You just need the truth and the patience to let it speak. As I walked to my car that final afternoon, the sun felt warmer, the air felt clearer. And for the first time since starting that job, I felt completely at peace. Not triumphant, Just grounded. Emily caught me on the way out and said, "You handled this better than anyone else could have." And maybe she was right. Maybe the real victory wasn't proving them wrong. Maybe it was proving to myself that staying steady, staying aware, and staying honest had more power than their entire scheme. And if there's one message I hope someone else hears from my experience, it's this: when people try to rewrite your story, keep your receipts. The truth has a way of speaking louder than anything else, and when it finally speaks, it changes everything. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt underestimated or pushed into silence, remember this: your truth matters. Your voice matters. And you are not alone. So before you go, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs strength today. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room ends up telling the story no one can ignore. Thanks for watching. Stay strong, stay steady, and trust your truth.